This is Taking the Lead, a podcast for B2B tech professionals, leaders, and executives who want to learn from female icons in the tech industry. In each episode, host Christina Brady interviews women who are driving revenue for some of the most respected tech companies in the world. Are you ready to get inspired?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Taking the Lead. I am Christina Brady, and today I am sitting down with Stephanie Sanders. Stephanie, how are you?
I'm good. Always excited to chat with you. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, meeting again at SaaStr, we had this moment where we were standing in a giant room and we were talking about my show, and I was like, wait, this is ridiculous. You need to be on my show. You are exactly the kind of person that I want to highlight and that all of you should absolutely learn from and be inspired by. And so, Stephanie, tell us a little bit about your story and how you wound up being a woman in revenue leadership doing what you do. Tell us the tale.
Well, I'm getting up there, it's not as quick of a story as it used to be, but I'll spare you the reading of the resume. But, I graduated from college in 2009. You guys can do the math on where that puts me, but wasn't the best of job markets. I was a marketing major in college, got a business BBA, degree, but didn't really know what I wanted to do. I don't think most people at that age truly understand, for the most part. And so I interviewed a few different types of roles, consulting, marketing, sales, and ended up taking a job at a company called Foresight, sold recently, but it was around for 15, 20 years and primarily started out as an outsourced business development function. Spun off a sales training consulting arm while I was there, which is really neat. But for me, what was exciting about it, starting my career, is I knew I was going to get the chance to work with a lot of different clients in a lot of different industries. And to me, the idea was okay, I go and do this for a year or two and figure out where I want to go and focus after that. But over the course of, I spent 4.5, 5 years there, I really just realized that it was the sales process that I really enjoyed and liked. And it didn't so much matter what you were selling, but how you were doing it. And you could almost piecemeal things together like a Mad Lib for the most part and just insert the specifics of each client and their details. And we primarily were working with companies in software and tech, and so in 2014, I moved up to Boston and took a job at a company called Bright Cove to get into the tech space, more specifically. And ever since then, I've just been at different kind of high growth SaaS startups, helping scale and helping put a little bit of strategy into place with the teams and everything that they have. And so most recently joined Contract Book about a year ago right now, coming up on it, and we are a Danish-based company. So have been in business for about 5, 6 years, but moved to the US market about a year and a half ago. And my job has really been helping figure out, the playbook and the process for going to market here in North America and building up the team, and have had a lot of fun doing it so far.
My gosh, amazing. And so tell us the makeup of your role right now and what you're doing every single day.
So every day is different, that's the
Yes.
beauty of a startup. And for us, we're almost like a startup within a startup. We have the security and all of that of a company that's very established in the European market, but we're still new here. We don't have the brand presence. We don't have, a lot of the processes in place. And so one of the things that was most appealing to me coming to Contract Book was the fact that I was going to be some of the first boots on the ground actually selling within this market. And it's funny, my story, and background, I got promoted into a management role really early on in my career and didn't spend a lot of time truly as a seller myself. And so throughout my career, interviewing for different jobs here and there was always that well, when's the last time you carried a bag, and where were you in AE? Because even when I was selling at Foresight, it was training and services more so than software. And so it had to me, selfishly, that was appealing, that I was going to be able to really focus on that for at least the first couple of quarters. And it's been the best thing that ever happened because I have, so much more empathy for the role. And I understand maybe why notes don't end up in the CRM at the end of the day more so than I did before. And it just helped me understand what the process should be, so much better than I think I would have had I not spent that time. And so today the team's grown and I'm not doing as much of that, but I do still work deals myself and then also focus, on growing the team and coaching them and working deals with them. And as we grow, getting more involved with different strategic initiatives that are going on in the company and everything. But it's a good mix, of a sales leadership, strategic role at this point.
Yeah. I mean, what I love about your experience and the part that you outlined there is I don't think as many people realize what it takes to gain that instant respect from your teams.
Yeah.
And it's one element of, hey, can my leader sell? Do they know how to sell the product? Like, absolutely, that's going to gain you the instant respect. But you mentioned that element of, like, I understand now why notes don't always make it into the CRM.
Yeah.
When you have lived in the life and you have that executive level empathy for what the role stands for, you manage your team differently because you have a different level of understanding of why things may not work sometimes or why
Mhm.
they may be broken or what goes into actually doing that thing that you keep asking your people to do.
Yep.
And so for you, if you keep asking your people to do the same thing over and over again and they're not doing it, you have a different way of looking at that and saying, okay, what data is going into telling me why they're not doing this versus let me just keep telling them to do that. So,
Mhm.
do you find yourself often using not only your past experience, but also starting to look at data to help you actually drive your team? Like, what is that ideal combination of I'm using my experience and my gut and what I've done, but also trying to loop in a little bit of here's the data around the why. Where
Mhm.
do you on a daily basis see yourself just balancing those two things?
I think it'd be really interesting to ask one of the reps on my team that question
Oh my
because
God, let's do it. No, I'm kidding. We're
let's
not.
do it. Nick, hurry up. I'm a very data driven person. I think that one of the things that I enjoy the most about a career in sales is that, of course, there are factors that are outside of anyone's control with any given deal. But if you control what you can control in that process, the math usually works out, at the end of the month and into the quarter and into the year. I don't think that I would want to be in a position if things were so much outside of my control. And I think that the data and metrics and all of that is the best objective way to look at anything like that because it compares apples to apples. It allows you to select like very specific parts of your sales process throughout the full sales funnel. I mean, we could do one episode on the top of funnel data and metrics and another one for mid funnel and another one for late stage, but it allows you to really dissect like every single step of what's going on and not in a way like I think that data and metrics get kind of a bad rep because there are the leaders that like use it as a way to say like, oh, you're not making enough calls or you need to be doing more,
Right.
or you need to be doing this. But like, I think of it more so as like, okay, you're not feeling well. You go to the doctor. First thing they do is like they run blood work because they can't tell by looking at you like what's wrong with you. It's like it's the diagnostic to help figure out what they need to go and look at further. Or you take your car to the shop, they plug it into the computer and it lights up and they tell you, okay, we need to look at the engine versus that's the only car part I know the name of. But you know what I mean? It helps diagnose where to focus. And so by understanding, what the norms are for each step, then you can say, okay, if this rep's struggling with their discovery to op conversion, like let's look at what's going on with those calls. But if this rep's struggling with proposal to close, like that's something separate. And so it's just a way of being able to tell where people are versus where they should be, and then really get specific with coaching and with training to those areas that are showing, weakness.
Ooh, data is a diagnostic. What a sexy thing to say. I love it.
Yeah.
When we when we think about so you mentioned like the three different areas of the funnel, and I agree with you. I don't know that so many folks realize how much you can use it very, very different and segmented as you're kind of going through the funnel. So for purposes of today, because we don't have 3 episodes in one, but we're going to try to cram as much as we can.
There we go.
If you are looking at front of funnel, middle of funnel, back of funnel, where do you think most people don't use data to make decisions and they should? Because I have my hypotheses, but I want to hear yours.
I'd say, I mean, I think top of funnel, it's pretty common, you know, especially
Right.
looking at the daily activities and calls and emails and social touches and all of that at this point. So I think there it's very normal, very accepted. It probably happens a little bit less and a little bit less as you go down funnel. So I mean, for mid stages, I think people still pay a lot of attention to discovery to off to, whatever, however you classify your stages and that kind of stuff. But then because it does get a little bit trickier towards the later stages of the sales cycle, it becomes so much more specific to like the prospect and their buying decision and, the kind of the stuff that starts to get outside of your control. It becomes a little bit less so. Is that what you were thinking as well?
Yeah, it's going right along with my hypothesis. So what I have always seen is you're 100% right. Everybody focuses on the data at the front of the funnel. How many calls does it take? How many calls does it take to set up a meeting? And then for a meeting to a pitch, and then a pitch to and then a close, right? And it's like there's this
It
weird
goes off to close and nothing in between.
Right. And there's this fade out in the middle. And then we really overly track the end of the funnel, but we track the end of the funnel to give us insights on how to drive the front of the funnel. And I tend to think that middle of the funnel, the reason why we don't focus there as much is because companies likely have a hard time getting clear data on what's happening in there because so much of it is subjective. It has to do with the prospect. It has to do with how well the rep is keeping their notes. It has to do with their own skill set. It has to do with like where the customer is and what's happening in the world. There's all of these areas in the middle. So we hear be like, all right, you got to do 100 calls to set, 20 meetings to set 5 pitches, and then you're going to close 5 per month. And you're like, okay, well, if we're not closing 5 per month, I guess we should just make some more calls. And really it's like, so knowing that your mind is very much focused on like, where can I find the data to drive my decision? And that middle of the funnel, how do sales leaders find a way to cut through the noise and actually use data to drive decisions and make it stop being so subjective?
The first part is just knowing, the steps that need to be happening and where. And so that's part of the process. And the thing with like measuring any of this, unfortunately, is it's a little bit, retroactive in certain instances, and we don't do QBRs or anything to that extent here yet. But I do like to sit down with the team at the end or the beginning of a new quarter, and just look at everything that happened in the previous quarter, not so much as a way to dwell on the past, but it's like when you look at something with that more bird's eye view, a lot of times there are patterns and things that emerge that you don't see when you're looking at it at a deal by deal level. And so for us, one of the things that we noticed looking at even last quarter's data was 40% of deals that were lost across the quarter, across reps, across different size orgs that we were selling to, it was all with the same close loss reason and the same stage in the funnel. Like that jumps out at you when you see it, laid out in a spreadsheet. And of course, for each one of those deals, there were very different specific things as to maybe why. But it's like, what could we be doing better to prevent, it from going that course in the first place? And so some of the things that we're trying out now, and it always is an A/B test and a little bit of an experimentation and a little bit of dialing things up and dialing things down is, we run a fairly transactional sales cycle, but what we're selling is being evaluated much more like an enterprise type sale because of what we do. We sell contract management solution that touches 7 different places within most organizations. And even though it's not the largest of ticket size, we're talking 15, 20K, sometimes there's 5, 6, 7 buyers involved. And so I think that a big thing that we saw happening last quarter is like us trying to keep up with our typical sales cycle and not have that get too far out of hand, but not being intentional about what we were doing in those 12, 15 days, And what can we do to pull more people in, and how like should we add an extra step to the sales process, or an extra call that helps scope this, or an extra proposal review that helps us, get through questions in their contracts. And, I think we'll see if it makes a difference, but like just being able to experiment, being able to compare, this is what we saw over this period versus these are the changes we made and what we saw through this period. Like it really helps understand like how things are moving and what's impacting, overall performance.
Well, you also just hit on the idea you can use data to diagnose, which I think that's where also a lot of people stop is they use data to diagnose and they'll identify, like in your example, we're losing a lot of deals at this stage right here. And we've diagnosed that issue. And now what is the fix? And the fix could be we need to do more training on this stage of the funnel. The fix could be something within our sales process is broken and it's actually not connecting with our customers. A diagnosis could be we have certain reps who are doing things differently at this stage that others should be doing. And so the diagnostic is the ones who are not getting stuck here. What are they doing? Yeah. And then determining it. So it's also this idea of I'm going to use data to diagnose what's happening, but then I'm actually going to use that to make a decision. And in your experience, just focused on that, using data to drive a change. Change is really, really scary. And I think a lot of times we first get the gut feeling that we want to change something. It's like something doesn't feel right.
Yep.
And anybody who is numbers or operations minded, when you go to them, you're like, this doesn't feel good. They're like, quantify that. And you're like,
Yeah.
it's icky. It just feels icky and I don't like it. So in your experience, have you been in a position where you've had that feeling first that something is wrong, something is broken? You've had to use the data to actually confirm the decision and then you were able to make the change? Have you gone through kind of that full gamut of feels icky, data supports that, now we're going to change it? If you have, how did you do that and who was involved? Big question for you. Just a fastball right at your face.
I think there's so many different ways you could even take that question though. Like something like that could be as simple as like, is it going to work out with this rep or not? Like using data to make those really, really tough decisions of hiring, of firing, of promotions, all of that. Like, I think that's one example. It could be something, in terms of, okay, are we packaging and pricing the right way, like to compete with the companies that we're up against? Like, how do we look at all of this stuff? I think a recent example would be more along the the side of things when it comes to like evaluating a tool that we want to potentially bring on. And so I'll give a little shout out to a company called Nooks. They're one of our customers, and we've been trying out, their virtual sales floor tool, which, allows, we're all remote in the US. It allows the team to pop in the platform and make calls together and be able to hear each other like while they're on the phone and give feedback, real time, more so than in a call review session a week later, that kind of stuff. But they have a power dialer part of it as well. And so what I've been considering is, okay, like this allows us to, like our baseline for metrics across the team, and our AEs do some of their own self-sourcing and pipeline building and stuff. So the BDR role is across the entire sales org for the most part. But like our baseline is this today using our typical methods. Nooks would allow us to do 2x, 3x, 4x, and like what is the input or what is the impact of that across everything else that we're going to be doing. So if BDRs and AEs can make 3 times more dials a day and get feedback on those calls in a way that they can't today with working with their teammates and everything, that's harder to quantify. But that would allow us to book 2x more meetings. And what would 2x more meetings do for our pipeline? And if we continue with the same win rate, like what would that mean for what we end up closing? And so when you're evaluating any sort of like tech to buy, I think it's important to do that type of analysis because it's money, and we have to justify why we want to go and spend what it's going to cost. And, for this discussion in particular, obviously, I've been involved. Our head of global business development has been involved for working with the biz dev side of things. My boss has been involved, RevOps has been involved, our head of operations has been involved, just because it is something that touches so many different parts of the organization for something as simple as like, do we add a piece to our tech stack, So I think you're going to be able to find ways to use, objective numbers at any point in a leadership role. It's just a matter of like how you dig in and how you slice and dice them.
Yeah. And then you have to be really good at telling the story to try to make the change that you feel like is best for the org. Because have you ever been in a situation where you have the data? We'll just call it, there's the data on the thing. Anyway, the data on the thing, and you're looking at the data and you're analyzing it to support this change that you want to make, or this improvement that you want to make, or this tool that you want to use. And then somebody else is looking at the same data and the same piece of paper. And they're like, I disagree. I actually think this data is telling us this. How do you
Or
handle?
you could be in conflict with yourself too. Like I've had situations where like I
Yeah.
look at the numbers and I know what it's saying, but it's like, but he really works hard, or like
Oh my God.
like there's
I
always that stuff where you can even debate with yourself. And I think that is even tougher than like having to have a tougher conversation with one of your colleagues. And so, I try to err on the side of like numbers don't lie, and that like your gut sometimes can be wrong. But nothing can be looked at in a vacuum, you know what I mean? And I think it's important to use as much as you can to help make informed decisions. And a lot of that includes collaboration with others for their perspectives and how they interpret it. But I mean, there's some stuff that's just going to be tough no matter what.
Well, you laid out one of, I think, the hardest things that anybody in any kind of leadership role has to deal with, which is look about this individual contributor, this rep, whoever the person is that is in your organization. The data is telling you they are underperforming or they are underperforming consistently, but you're fighting with yourself because you're like, but there's so many good things and they're trying so hard and they're improving. And there's something about that individual that tells you, no, they're great, they're good. But then somebody else on the team with the exact same numbers on paper,
Right.
you do not have that sentiment about. So then you are trying to quantify and you're trying to make the case of one individual with the same numbers that are objectively bad, but no, they are good. And then another person, same numbers, but you're like, no, those numbers are more reflective of their work. And you have to try to balance that
Yeah.
and make the right decision. And you can go back and forth a ton. And in that situation where you're working with a cross-functional partner and maybe you are looking at what is on the page very, very differently, how do you navigate that and still feel like you win? Because yeah, numbers don't lie, but the stories they tell can be very, very nuanced. Right? It's like the number's there. I see the number. Here's what I see this number this way. And you're like,
Yeah.
well, how do you deal with that? Because it's tough internally.
Yeah. And you're not always going to win. And like, you have to be okay with that. Me personally, and I mean, me, like, I'm a very direct person and I
Yes,
don't,
ma'am.
I don't see a reason not to be for the most part, but sometimes that can be a challenge, working with people you might not work with all that often, or just trying to understand how best to collaborate and communicate with other parties and people and reps on your team and all of that. But so I think that the most important thing approaching any of those situations is just like going into it with like an open mind, because maybe there is something that they see that you're blinded by because you're too close to the situation sometimes. Or maybe the way they're interpreting, the numbers and everything is probably the right way to look at it. And so I think you have to be open to that conversation. And at the end of the day, it's like, sell it like what we're doing. This isn't the end of the world. It's not life or death. We're not curing cancer. What's more important, at the end of it is being able to continue, those collaborations and relationships with the people that you work with. And sometimes like you have to decide, like, is this a hill I'm going to die on? And if it's not, then I think you just look at it from, okay, this is a learning experience. These are the ways that maybe next time, like, when something like this is going on, I could take their perspective and use it, and then, move on to whatever the next challenge and problem is. But it's always about communication. It's always about being open to other perspectives and other ways of looking at the same slice of the pie. and then using that, to help hopefully progress your agenda and everything as well in the
Yeah.
next situation.
The next situation is right around the corner.
Yeah.
It's going to hit you right away. It's going to slap you right in the face. It's
Yeah.
going to smack. A way to pivot. I know if anybody on this call has ever, so some people may be screaming at whatever they're listening to saying, but what if the data is wrong? And what I mean is, let's talk about the intersection of data and trust. I've worked at some fairly large tech companies and some, a tad smaller. There have been moments where a very, very trusted team has pulled and presented data, and that data, for whatever reason, is actually incorrect, and the
Right.
numbers aren't the right numbers.
Yep.
And I found that when I would present that to my team and they recognized that data is incorrect, it was very hard for me to be able to gain the trust back from the team that any data set coming from that same team or that same org was going to be correct. So it was almost like after multiple times of like, well, that was wrong or that wasn't pulled correctly, we had to operate with this element of a little bit of mistrust and double checking.
Yeah.
And once you don't trust one cell in the data, the entire spreadsheet to me becomes just a little bit hazy. So in your experience, how do you balance that intersection of data and trust and this idea that if you're presenting me data, it better be infallible? And sometimes that just can't happen.
Yeah. Had a pretty similar thing come up, in the past couple of months to this. And it was one of our marketing and sales, collaboration meetings. And, I'm not saying we have any issues with the contract book, but sometimes there's a little bit of tension that can live between marketing and sales. And I think here we do a really good job of avoiding that. But we were in a meeting presenting, the numbers over a certain period. And it was one of those things I was looking at. I was like, that can't be right. Like, that just cannot be the right number. And again, very direct. Like, I probably should have just held that to myself until the meeting was over and talked separately to that person. But I think the good part to come out of it was I raised the concern and I said, I'd really like to look at this with you. Like, can you show me where you pulled this from? And then I met with them, that person separately, and we realized there was an error. And so to me, there was no question the next time because we had looked at it together. We'd worked on it together. We found where the error was coming from, which made it, the next time say, okay, I know they're pulling this the right way this time. So this probably is the right way. And I think that, for most things, people just want to know why. They want to have that explanation of if something's different than what it's been or what they think it should be, the reasoning behind it and what's happened and what's going to be done to prevent it from happening again in the future. And so I think that the way that I initially handled it probably wasn't best, but then, being able to go and have that conversation and work with them to come to the right answer made me say, okay, this should be right, the next time that we do it.
Yeah. Do you think that the way that you handled it not being right and saying it in the moment was because whoever was presenting the data felt called out or embarrassed? Or do you think it was because you created doubt amongst people in the room in the entire subset of what you were going through? What makes you think mostly that was the wrong move to say it out loud? And I'm going to do a caveat because what I find would help with some of the trust on my teams when I'd be presenting data that we'd be making decisions based on is if there was an issue and I caught it, then when I said, hey, this data is sound later and this looks good, I had the trust because they knew, okay, if there's an issue, Christina's going to find it. So on the one hand, it's like you could have garnered some trust, but on the other, something gave you that icky feeling. So what was it?
I mean, and I'm not saying that I shouldn't have. It was just, maybe could have handled it. It was just, I presented a problem with no possible solution, you know what I mean? And so
you're wrong.
It wasn't that I was saying okay, did you get this from here? And should we pull it from here? It was just, this is wrong. So I think that, again, that goes into the ability, to work together and collaborate with people and just saying maybe if I had said it more so hey, you know what, based on what I have seen, with these conversions, that number kind of surprises me. Could we go and look at it separately? That would have been maybe a better way to handle it than that just doesn't look right.
I mean, we become better professionals by having those moments of like, way I'd handle that. I'm like you, I am fairly direct, and I have certainly had my moments and multiple of them where I'm just like, this is who did this? And then I'm like, wait, I don't I shouldn't approach it
Yeah.
this way. Because you also, I mean, you have to rely very, very heavily on cross-functional partners and other
Sure.
folks in the go-to-market org to really help you pull this data and make the decision. And so for
Especially
you,
for something like that. I mean, I'm
yes.
a salesperson. Like I can work my way around, HubSpot and Salesforce reports, but I mean, I'm not a data analyst
Yeah.
by any means. I can barely use Excel. And so for something that I do rely on so heavily for my job, like it's very important to be able to have those partnerships.
Yeah. How and so on a daily basis, what cross-functional partners would you say that you are working with to kind of help you supplement and get the information that you need to drive?
Obviously, RevOps. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the given. But we actually within our org, we have a data team as well that is
Oh,
under RevOps. And so that is something that I haven't had the luxury of having at previous jobs, which is really, really helpful. And so for a company that the size that we are, we're like 130, 140 employees. I mean, we have a RevOps function, we have sales ops, we have marketing ops, we have business ops. Like we've got a lot of resources there that we wouldn't that I haven't had at other companies in the same size employee count. So that helps a lot. Otherwise, previously it's been more so a function of sometimes even finance or just operations in general being the ones that house that type of information. But I think that most sales leaders are going to rely the most heavily on rev ops or sales ops, which
yeah.
is tough because they're so busy.
Right. And everybody has requests for them.
Yeah.
And what, in your opinion, is the right way to go about getting the extra information that you need from those teams to run your day without completely overwhelming them? Because sometimes it could just feel like everyone's throwing all of their requests, like, I need this, pull this, have
Yeah.
this happen. So do you recommend sort of organizing a system by which we go and ask these teams to give us their specific time?
We use tickets here. So we submit a request with, why we need what we need and what it is and what the impact of it is and all of that. And it takes 25 seconds to fill out. We use Slack and Monday.com to do it. I think that's great. I think that, if you're in a director, VP level role at a company, you should be pretty self-sufficient with this too, like you should be able to build a report on your own and get the information yourself for the most part. But there's obviously stuff that you're gonna need help with. I try myself first, and if I can't figure it out, then we have the ticketing system, which helps, just keep their funnel, organized, and we can rank, I absolutely need this done because I can't work without it versus, hey, it would be really nice to have.
Yeah.
And they work on sprints, a way that they say, okay, we'll have this by this week and this by that week.
Yeah. I feel like this is also a good time to employ have you ever used the like important versus urgency matrix?
No.
Okay, this is one of my favorite matrices. I'm going to try to say it out loud, but it's basically like you do one of these, right?
Yeah.
Do one of these. And if you're just listening, I'm crossing my arms to make kind of a 4-quadrant kind of graph. And at the top, you write important, and at the
Mhm.
bottom, you write not important, and on the right, you put urgent, and on the left, you put not urgent.
Yeah.
And this is an exercise I recommend everybody to do when you are asking a cross-functional partner for help is if it is in the top right quadrant, it is important and it is urgent.
Mhm.
This is a meaningful thing that I need right now. On the left-hand side, this is really, really important. This is not urgent. You don't
Mhm.
have to put everything down and get me this, but it is an important report that I need. Maybe give them a buy date, right? Like
Yeah.
I need this in a week. I need this in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
The bottom left quadrant, that's not where you really want to be. That
Yeah.
bottom left quadrant, this is not important. It's not urgent. I just want to see how many of my people are doing X, just like for fun or like just kind of like I just kind of want to see, but you can't tie it to a business need. And we get a lot of those that come through, right? Where people are like, hey, could you pull some data on this? And you're like, what? And they're like, I
Right.
need it now. And you're like, no, you don't. And then on the other side, it's not important, but it's very, very urgent, where maybe there's something that somebody else is putting on your plate, or it's not going to meaningfully impact the business, but for some reason,
Mhm.
deadline is due. Who's going to make the cutoff for this spiff? Like, look, it's super urgent. And I get that, like, in the stake of priorities, not big. It's not that important, but like, I really need it right now. Like, can you please prioritize this?
Yeah, that's really
Before
good.
submitting, yeah, before submitting and asking for anything, just do that quick exercise and then
Mhm.
use that verbiage when you are requesting it. Like,
Yeah.
this is really important. This is really urgent. This is really urgent. I get that it doesn't look like a big priority, but here's why I need it. Those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And save your people the time.
Yeah.
So that brings us, see, and then we always go longer than I want to because I get so in depth in your questions. Let's pivot over to our rapid reveal if you are up for it.
Yeah, let's do
Yes.
it.
Yes, as we know, I have 5 questions. You have 60 seconds or less to answer each,
Yep.
which you're really good at hitting your point and hitting it quickly, so you're not gonna have a problem with this, which is phenomenal. You're like, "Here's the point, bam." I'm like, "Full
Right,
stop."
I'm telling you.
I love it, I love it. Number 1, what was your first paid job
So first ever paid job. I was a swimmer.
ever?
I was a swimmer growing up. And so my first job that I ever got like money for was a lifeguard and swim coach for my like summer pool.
Yes, I
I
was a
had a
swimmer growing up
blonde
too.
hair that summer.
Oh, I bet you yeah, with the chlorine
Yeah.
streaks.
Yeah.
What was your stroke?
I was a sprint freestyler, so the 50, the 100, and occasional 200, but that was getting a little long for me.
Yeah, I always thought that I was a butterflyer as a swimmer, and I was like, "Oh, that's my stroke." And then
Yeah.
when I think about it, I was actually really bad at it. I just thought that it was cool, and I was like, "That's my
That
stroke."
was
And
the
then I was
hardest
thinking about
one, so you were good.
right. I was like, "Mm, yeah, no, I do butterfly." And then I think about it, and I was like, "This is very poor, very, very poor execution on my part." I don't know why I said that.
I
So
really think, and we're probably at 60 seconds, but kind of
it's
tying
fine.
this to everything we've been talking about, I think that a lot that has impacted how I look at stuff like this with data, with numbers, with all of that is because of swimming. It was very black and white. It's like, did you get the time or did you not? And for me, I think that was why I always and I played at some other sports like up to like middle school, but then I picked swimming and was very focused on that. But that was what I liked about it. It wasn't anything that other people impacted my performance. It was me versus a clock. And that's kind of how I've looked at, okay, did I do what I needed to do this month to get to my number? Yes or no? And like, I think that's what made me, gravitate towards a career in sales as well.
You see, this is why we do the rapid reveal. Right there. We just
Tiny
little bit of who you are. We just captured your why. It's a beautiful thing. I love it. Brings me to number 2. What's an irrational fear of yours?
I do not like to fly. I have been on like 60 some flights this year. I fly all of the time, but I'm a very nervous flyer and I know it's the safest and I know all of the stats, but when the turbulence hits, there's nothing that can help me feel better up there anyways.
So I'm hearing you say that the data suggests
Yeah.
that it's very, very safe.
This is one of those times where it's like, I see it, I understand it, but it doesn't change like that internal.
Yeah. Don't like the data. Don't like it. Simply won't listen to it. Don't like it.
Yeah.
Doesn't agree with me.
Well,
Awesome.
numbers look off to me.
I don't, you know what? Somebody rerun this. This can't be safe. We're flying in the air. There's
Yeah.
nothing holding us up. No nets. This doesn't seem safe. All right. Number 3, if you could wave a magic wand and acquire any new skill, anything, what would it be?
Well, I have zero musical talent. I really enjoy, going to concerts, and I feel like that's just one of the coolest things that someone can be really good at. So I would probably pick, just be able to pick up any instrument and be able to play it and that kind of thing.
I love it. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Number 4, what is the last pep talk you gave yourself? When did you have to talk yourself up?
I have to give myself some sort of little bit of a pep talk most days,
You're like today, right before this.
yeah, gosh, I gotta go. I have to go do this now. Let's see. Last quarter, we had a pretty slow start. I think most Q3 of this year wasn't great for a lot of companies. And coming towards like the final couple weeks, it was just pretty crazy time. Like we did SaaStr, and then it was like we kind of caught up for a week, and then it was quarter end. And, it was a pep talk for me, myself, but like just for the team as a whole, like, well, what can we do? Like, what can we show as this final big push? And we were able to close like 7 or 8 deals on the last day of the quarter, which I wouldn't say is the best way to work, but we at least, got a final little push over the finish line and hit, targets and stuff like that at the last minute, which was pretty awesome.
God, I love it. See, that's a good one. And this brings us to number 5. What would be your ideal way to spend 2 hours of your time? Could do
2
anything
hours
you
of
want
my
for 2
time.
hours.
Whew, right now, I think I'd probably pick like a 90-minute massage at a really nice spa and then just enjoy the 30 minutes of relaxing after that.
The 30 minutes of everybody just leaving you alone. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's what
feel
I'm really
that.
right now.
Yes. Well, I imagine that a lot of folks are likely going to want to connect with you, not only to learn more about you and what you are doing, but also more about your company and what you are building. So where can folks find you and learn about you or learn about Contract Book?
Yeah, so Contract Book, we're contractbook.com. We help work with companies to ease and automate their contract processes. So always happy to chat about that. I'm on LinkedIn. It's LinkedIn/Steph D. Sanders. And my email is just sds@contractbook.com. So I would love to connect with anyone who's listening and, chat about data, swimming, all of the above.
Never pep talks,
Pep talks.
fears.
Just
I love it.
Yeah, not
Just all
too
the
much more
things.
on the flying because I have
So you're
to
just gonna
fly to the sales assembly dinner this week. So
You do. You do. Yep. So we will see you there. And everyone for listening with us again, thank you for spending your time with us. Stephanie, I cannot thank you enough. This has
thank
been a
you.
wonderful
Get on to-
conversation.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Taking the Lead. If you're looking for more inspiring stories from women leaders in B2B tech, then visit us at motionagency.io/takingthelead.